and welcome to your second tutorial of the Android programming series. Today we're going to be showing you the environment you're going to be making your apps in, the basics really. So this is what you should have got if you followed the first tutorial. If not, I'll post a link in the description, you can follow it there, on how to install this environment and the software development kit involved. What we're concentrating on at the minute is how to create a new project so you can get involved and start making the apps and messing around. What you do is you go to File, New, Android Application Project. You want to give it an application name. This is the name that shows up on the phone, so I'm just going to call it My First App for the time being. We'll do it all capitals. So the project name, no spaces, will be the same. Get rid of com.example and change it for something more better you can organise. So I'm just going to put it as at the moment and tutorials. So this is quite important as well. So the minimum required SDK is the platform you want your app to minimum have the software development kit attached to it. So API 8 is normally what I go for. I guess you can go a bit higher, you can go like API 11, but sometimes if you haven't got a low enough minimum, you can be void from doing certain things within the app. So for this tutorial I'm going to go for API 19 as well, that's the maximum, and compile with API 19 so I can use it on my phone. So I can test it on my phone. And this is just general theme of the app. I'm just going to go hollow light. Click next, and then you'll be on the configure project page. This you just keep normal unless you don't want a default activity at the beginning, but otherwise you just click next. This generally is the design of the logo people would see when they see your app on the Play Store or on your phone. You can change it to an image, clip art or text. For the time being I'm just going to put My First App, so yeah, when we test this app we'll be able to see it on the phone and then the emulator, but we'll speak about more of that later. You can change the colours, the shape, so you can just mess around with that yourselves and see what you get. Click next, and then this is the part where an activity is the initial screen that you're going to be on. You want to create a blank activity for the time being for the tutorial, but you can have a look at the others. So this is just the characteristics of the activity. So the activity name, main activity, this will be the main activity that you're using, user interface, so that you can have an initial page to go to. So layout name is the name of the layout, which defines the design of the page of the activity of your app, which is the main activity, so we'll call it activity main. And you'll ignore this for the time being, we'll learn more about that later. Click finish, and you should have a default project set up, hello world. Might take a little while to load. Let's give it a second. Alright, so that's loaded. Generally, if it doesn't change here, you just got to click over here and it'll all pop up. Just drag that over. So this is the screen you should be coming up with when you first create your project, and you'll notice that there's a package explorer on the left hand side and it's got everything inside. That's vital to the app and the app making process. So I'll go through it and I'll give you a brief description. You don't need to know all of it. Some of it's generated by the system, some of it's just stuff you need to know and where you need to go to design and code your app. So the main code for all the functions inside the app go here in the source file. This whole hierarchy defines the methods or functions inside the activity that we've created by default when you create the project. So the activity goes inside a Java file. This will declare the initial components and code that will go onto the main activity. So if you want any movement or any calculations or any form, or if you want something to do anything, then you will put it in this bit. That's your package name that you started with, and this is just the scope that all your files go into. So the next one down is the generated Java files. So these are generated by the system, and this is inside your project. You'll have an r.java file and a build configuration. I won't worry about the build configuration too much, but the resources file is vital to a lot of things inside. This will enable you to call functions such as drawable, so you can call an image onto an app and stuff like that. So you need that. If you delete that, it will just generate itself again, so it's not a big issue. If you have problems with that, you can find the r.java file online somewhere, but I'm sure it will generate itself. These you don't need to worry about too much. There's about the APIs you've got your app set to, so I've got mine set to 4.4, which is the KitKat operating system, and then these are dependencies and the private libraries attached to the API, so they'll probably come from the build tools where you installed in the last tutorial. So we've got the bin folder, which is the resource folder, and the androidmanifest.xml. This is the basis of the app. This is the communication line between the Android system and the components inside your app. You'll get a user interface, which is this, but I don't like looking at this, so I tend to go to the androidmanifest.xml document, and you can see it much better because you've got the application itself defined here. So from default, we've got inside the XML file. If you haven't done XML before, you're probably better off doing some before you go into this, because if you change anything wrong in this, you might disable a component inside your app or a function inside your app. So you want to know what you're doing inside this. And I'll put up a tutorial on XML later on in the series, but you won't need it at this point. I'm just going over the basics of the environment. So yeah, this is the manifest. It's defined by the manifest tag, and you can pretty much just read. It just says everything in front of you, so you can pretty much define everything by what it says. We've made it quite simple. So your package, that's the package that's inside. The SDKs it uses, so the minimum SDK, this is what we put earlier. So at the beginning, when we create the project, we did that minimum SDK requirement. This is defined by the manifest, so the system knows what the minimum SDK is required rather. And then we define the target SDK version earlier as well when we create the project, and this is the latest version you can get. So I did it purposely so I can use it on my phone. I can show you testing applications in future tutorials. I'll be starting from this My First App package, and I'll just go through, and then we'll eventually develop an app together. The next tag is application. This is generally the scope of the application itself, so My First App. So it allows a backup. The icon is the launcher that we defined inside the project that we created earlier, so IC launcher is the name of it, and then the drawable is the function you can call from the r.java file, which is stored in the generated Java files inside the environment. This is the app name, which is stored in the string resource file, which you can edit and change and fiddle around with whenever you want, and I'll show you that in a second. This is the app theme, so the app theme I defined inside the project file. So basically creating the project is just a user interface for the XML document to get the groundings of the application you're creating. So it just tells Android what you're having and what you want, what your preferences are really. And then you start getting down to the activity stages. The activity is the main screen that you've created by default, which at this point is only, it says hello world. So if you go to resources, layout, fragment main, and you got your default page, and it says hello world, My First App. So that's where the app name is defined, my first app, and I'll show you where that is in a second, but I'll finish explaining the manifest. So that's our screen in a minute, and you can tell this by what we've got in the activity. So the activity is the screen, and you've got the main activity, which is the action of the main activity is launched on the initial opening of the app. So this is the main activity. This will be the first activity placed on the app because it's been launched. If certain characteristics will change, you can define when the activity comes along, and what kind of activity you can have and where it comes from. Say if you want to press a button, you want another activity to come up, hence another screen, etc. And these are the filters inside. So these are the intents of the activity. So the intent of activity at the minute, by default, is just to show up. Really, it's just so you can view it, so the user can view it, and that's the filter it just applies for it, so you can define it easily inside the manifest. End activity tab, end application tab. Notice how the activity tab's inside the application tab. If it was the other way around, you won't be able to run your project or view the activity that's been placed, because the activity is outside of the application. As you can see on the right here, there's a visual outline here of how the manifest goes. So that's the basics of the manifest. You'll learn more about that because you need to keep it updated as you go through the application process. So if you add an activity, you'll have to add an activity tab. And if this isn't defined, then it doesn't tell Android that you have an activity there, so you won't be able to, no one will be able to see the next activity that you're trying to let the user view. So that's the Android manifest, the basics. I'll go further into detail when you've learned about activities and the components you can add to an Android screen and in different areas of the Android process. So the next thing we're going to look at is a layout inside the resources folder in your package explorer. So in the layout, there's two layouts here. There's one with activity main, which if you go to the graphical layout, it's just the main activity, in which contains everything that you have. So this isn't, no one's touched this. I changed this to relative layout before, but by default it's not touched. You want to click on the fragment main. So if you're going for a higher API, so a newer piece of software on the Android phone, you want fragments. You want to be able to time different functions differently and change. So if you want two different components doing the same thing, doing different things on different parts of the screen, you'll have to separate the fragments of the screen in order to do that. So by default, the ADT creates fragment main.xml and starts editing that if it's a newer version of Android. So if we go into the XML file again, this is design, the same characteristics as the manifest, so it's inside tags. It's a bit like HTML, so it's inside tags, and you've got all the Android components which you call from the Android library, which you've installed within the bundle from the previous tutorial. If you wanted to add a new component to your layout, you'd need to define a new set of tags. And for instance, I'm going to use a label because I want it to. No, I guess I can go for a text view just to make things simple. So if you want to define a new text view, you can just use the tag text view. Make sure it's open though, so it's open so you can define the characteristics of the text view. So if you close it, it won't define anything. It'll be black and nothing will happen. So if you take it out of the brackets, then it won't define anything for the text view. So just be aware of that. Android layout width. You can easily just copy and paste this, but just for the purpose of this video, I'm just gonna type it in myself. So the layout width, I'm gonna do match parent. So I'm gonna make this a description of the app. So I'm gonna put the app description in this, and the match parent defines the width to go all the way along until the parent's width ends. The parent in this case is the relative layout container, but we'll talk more more about that specifically later on when you start understanding the functionality of the actual apps and the design process. So I'm just going to define the layout height here as well, but I'm going to make that wrap content just so it doesn't go all the way down the screen. I don't want style as of yet. So now I'm going to close that off. So now we've got a text view on the screen, but there's no text view as there's no string to view. There's no text to view at all. So how we're going to go about this is by defining the string, which is already shown here. But how can you define a string? This was one of the first hurdles I came across, and I couldn't find where you could change the words, and I thought it would just be a simple click, change. I mean, you can change the text here in the graphical user interface, but I'd rather find the way of coding it. So if you go down to your resource directory and go into the values folder, you can find this XML document called strings. So in the strings document there's an array of strings, or a catalogue of strings, and this is the graphical user interface that Android provides in the environment. So if you want to add a string through this way, you can just go to add string, click on there now, and you can put the variable name for the string. So the name in this case just says name, but it means variable name. This is what you're going to store the array of characters in. So for this instance, I'm going to make an app description and call it app descript. So this is an application description, is the value of that variable. So you Control S, save that. Now you've got an app description. There's your string added to your collection of strings. But if you don't want to do it in the graphical user interface way, you can do it in the XML document way. So all you have to do is just copy the line of code. If you want to add a string, got the previous stuff, so copy string name, and then I'll call it app description 2. So this is, so I'll just put, this is a subdescription. So there's a new string. That's how you can do it in the XML. So I've shown you both ways, and I'll show you that they both work also. So to make them both work, you've got to create another text view. So we'll just another text view bracket, copy and paste it if you like to make this process quicker. And now you've got the ability to define the strings inside them. So if you can, this touchpad stops being sensitive. So Android text equals at string. So we're referring to the resource folder and the values, the resource directory values folder and the string XML document. So now in that directory there's a catalogue of strings we've saved and were previously there. So we want to call the app description. So it already says it here, so you can double click that, that's fine. And now you've got the app description in there. So 1 second, it's coming up with an error. So I need to end it here. Alright. So now we'll just define this one. I've got an error there, I'm going to try and sort it out in a second. So I'm getting distracted here. So at string app description 2. So this is the second one we created in the XML document. So what's going on here? Oh, okay, so it's got the random slash. Alright, we solved that, that's right. Easy debugging. So now you go on graphical layout. It's all on top of each other. So the container isn't responding to the layout format that we've chosen. So in this case it's a relative layout. So what I'm going to do is make it easier. I'm going to change it to a linear layout. A linear layout is just basically a straight line, whether you want it down or across. It just stacks or columns across. Simple as that. So if you change the layout to a linear layout on the fragment main, so this will by default put them together, but we don't want that to happen either. We want it to go down vertically So to do this, you've got to change the orientation of the linear layout. So call the Android library again, orientation, component, and do vertical. So we want it to do a vertical orientation, save that, and now here we go. So that's how you add strings, use a resource, and use the graphical user interface, XML. We'll get more into dimensions and the styles as we go through the series, but I hope you got the basics of it. You can also access the manifest file here as well. Down here, project properties. There's nothing more to explain. This is the basics of the environment that we're in. I've pretty much covered the package explorer, which allows you to do most of it. The rest of the app is just your basic, just to make it ease of use on your environment, outlines of what's used inside, so you can keep a visual on what's going on. But as long as you code correctly and keep it within the tags, make sure you debug in line by line, and you should be fine throughout the series. But that's the basics, and that's tutorial 2 over. The next tutorial I'm going to start testing apps, so I'll creating emulators and putting them on actual devices and showing you a test app on my phone. So I hope you liked it, and that's it.